the public information officer.
Short blurb about observations, essentially, of the meeting. That's in Loveland. And then also there's the Larimer County Water Education Series. We're having our last session on Thursday evening, 6 to 8 p.m. That's at the Fort Collins Larimer County hearing room. And it's focused on kind of what's next for Larimer County water. So we're going to be talking about water equity issues. We'll be talking about the Northern Water Alliance. I'm trying to think if that's the right name. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Some kind of regional collaboration efforts around water management. We'll talk a little bit about flood planning and Larimer County Water Master Plan. So if you're interested in that, there's information on the Larimer County website as well as the Colorado Water Center website. We're joint hosting that. Okay, so did anyone practice any empathic listening over the past month? Does anybody even remember what that was or what we talked about?
I feel like I waited to respond more, trying to bite my tongue more.
Okay.
Actively doing that.
Actively biting the tongue, yep. Yeah.
I felt like, Deb and I were talking about this on the way over. That the two sessions having those things, the divisive conversation and the impact listening, I feel like I've tried to be a mouthpiece to other people to say, be cognitive of this stuff. And are you doing that? Because I think that's how we could be better people to each other if we were to practice these things. And so I feel like not only practicing it, but also trying to preach it to others, just try it one time, or just try to be aware of it. And it does make you think about it a little bit more. So
how has the feedback been when you're preaching?
Actually, I think I chose more of the people that would be actually listen, but they said, that makes sense, that does, especially in the world that we're living in and whatnot. And I said, the listening thing, when we did the little deal of trying to do the listening thing, I said, somebody goes, you're right, you're already forming an opinion.
Yeah.
And so several people agreed, saying, yeah, I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I don't even know why I'm listening because I've already made my opinion up or whatever. So it was an interesting conversation. So, but I think, I don't know, I feel like some of the stuff that we're getting, it's our duty as well to go out and share it with others too. So to try to hopefully not just us, the 20 of us, but maybe will affect another 20, so.
Great. Any other thoughts?
I didn't tell my wife because that would be a huge change. After nearly 50 years of marriage, if I were an empathic listener to her, I'd be in trouble. I didn't tell her. She asked me, what'd you do in class? I told her about everything except.
I've been using the phrase "tell me more" more often, like that. I like to just have that in my head as I'm listening to somebody, that that's something I can use to respond to get them to talk more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, reading some of your homework responses, you know, there was still a lot of interest and discussion about water equity and how it relates to housing. One of the things that I read, which kind of stuck in my mind, was like, okay, you know, we're having these conversations, we're focusing on the negative. What about solutions and focusing on the positive? And yeah, it made me think, you know, where can we find examples of successful, I guess, water equity stories or successful collaboration stories around water? And maybe we'll hear some of that today, perhaps. But does anyone have any thoughts on that or have anything to share?
Equity is a hard thing to define because everybody needs water and it's a finite amount. And it's amazing to me the collaboration that has existed so far. But given the water is getting shorter, because once it goes into somebody's inventory, it's not going to be available. I don't think we're not going to sell, you know, Fort Collins Lumber is not going to sell any water just because they have surplus to make rent it out. And I think some of these compromises will probably come into quick, you know, over some fight zone. Collaboration is great when you have a resource you can share. When it's no longer available for sharing, people are going to fight. You know, I mean, you need water, I need water, and there's only a little bit. Do we say, oh, let's split it and both of us starve, or do we say, I'm going to take what I can and you don't get it, or vice versa?
Mm-hmm.
I just think that 50 years from now or sometime, the collaboration is going to break down unless you start having heavy rains and reservoirs get filled and everybody's feeling it.
Other people's thoughts?
That makes sense, or
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's your.
that's what people do. Rats fight over food. I'm not making fun. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
When things are short, embers come out.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, you know, of course, the saying, what is it? Whiskey is for drinking, water's for fighting.
Yeah.
And I think that's the classic kind of fallback is like, yeah, scarce resources, there's going to be more conflict, there's going to be litigation. And I mean, there's several examples of where, including on the Colorado River, where, you know, it's obviously a scarce resource, getting more scarce, more people. But there has been collaboration because the option of conflict and litigation is not an option. It is just not. And people need to move forward and can't spend, you know, millions of dollars and you know, decades in court battling things while in the meantime, you know,
Once it reaches that
water
critical point
resources.
where there is no surplus that we can share, then I don't see the collaboration. What do you do? How do you collaborate with nothing left?
Yeah, I think that's where, you know, you've got to have
This is not
systems.
this year or next year. This is 20, 30, 50 years out.
Yeah, and I think that's why planning and having systems in place right now to foster collaboration, getting that all, you know, in line and thinking for those scenarios that are going to happen in the future, doing scenario planning where it's like, okay, if we, you know, have year after year of drought and our reservoirs are at this level, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And people are thinking about that. So yeah, any other thoughts? Water equity. Yeah.
So I'm not gonna like totally put the planner spin on this, but after having done 2 years of comprehensive planning with my current council and having Denver growth kind of pending in our area, Denver growth not just being like housing impacts, but it's also the cost of living. You'd be surprised what some of the houses are selling for that's in Colorado. Some very old stock, not new. Yet we're still in Weld County looked at as kind of more of a hub of balanced housing. We provide housing to kind of an economic group that can't afford to live in Denver, but they work in Denver and Boulder primarily. When you look at new housing and the cost of water, and water is a commodity, it's bought and sold on the open market, and if you can pay to play, you can get water for your development. And so the cost of housing that's now going in around us, I don't even want to tell you, I moved from Denver. I don't even want to tell you what I sold our house for to a first-time home buyer who qualified for an affordable housing style loan. I'm not going to tell you because it makes me sad as a planner. But I think that the impact of water on housing is like adding a whole nother cost of a house on top of a house. And that leads to how are we gonna build affordable housing? Somebody's got to pay for that water. Who's it gonna be? Where is it gonna go? And if you've got water, you've also got a choice about how you want to invest that water. You as a jurisdiction have that land use choice, your vision for the future, how you want to grow, what's dense enough, what's too dense, what kind of product are you comfortable with or not? Are you even comfortable with more housing? These are all questions cities and towns are facing across the state. And then you have developments happening within counties. And you have impacts on water and sewer districts that may not have had those residential impacts before. Put that on to the cost of housing. And I can promise you that people who bought their first house in Colorado with their child cannot buy that same house anymore. So that's how important water is. Sorry, I just totally went on a diatribe. I promise I won't talk the rest of the day. But that's really how important every little function and drop of water really is. And I'll leave it at that. But it's going to be our housing problem in the future. It's going to be who has water and who wants to use it.
Not only the cost of the water, people don't realize the underground, the infrastructure, that's really expensive as well. And people say, hey, we can't afford to have that. But we just had a budget session last week and a new interceptor or main line is going to be $20 million. So somebody's got to pay that. It's got to be factored into the cost of tap fees and whatever else. People just see, they turn the tap on and see, I get water for my coffee.
Yeah.
They don't see the pipe and the construction that goes on to bring that water to them.
Yeah, and
It's a bunch of things.
in the water center, one of the things that we do is education about water. Obviously, we educate students, we educate community leaders. And one of the things that we've been hearing is like, well, kids don't know about those services and are interested. And we kind of make that part of the education, and also, the importance of those careers as well, and having kind of these pipelines for local kids to get into careers, because utilities are having problems filling their positions and things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of different approaches to it. But I'm very excited about education and creating those pathways for students to get good positions in their communities. And they're able to have a living wage. And anyway, yeah. Well, one other thing I wanted to bring up before we get started here is in your homework I read, water law. So complex in administration. Oh my gosh, like how do we take that information and apply it to our own position, or how do we share that complexity with others and help them understand what are the basics of what people want to understand, and how can we help, convey that information? And it's something that we struggle with too, being educators on water. And, do we need a fact sheet? Do we need just like a a video about like the basics of water law. But I know a lot of you commented and were just like, whoa. Any thoughts on that or any follow-up that we should think about?
If it's lawmaking, it's only gonna get more complex, it never gets simpler. It isn't gonna get any simpler. So, I guess we gotta work on trying to understand it.
Just seem like job security for lawyers, the more complex you make it, the more assurance that you're gonna need their help. On the level 7.
I do think it might have been helpful too to just see like even some example case studies of like, hey, this is how they work through these cases. These were the points you went back to. This is why they won or lost the case versus it just being this really ambiguous black hole of like, yep, this is what you do. These are the steps you go through, but without understanding any of the why behind how they navigate those steps. I thought like there's a consistency.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, how does water law impact us? Like, from my perspective, we're going through change cases. And to Gov's point, I feel like we're just fighting each other. We're just wasting dollars to fight each other to even get it into the court. So, in terms of the community effort, but we all do it.
So you're changing water from ag to
Like flip side of what you were saying. Do have a case study of, I own a farm, I need to install a well. Here are the steps I would have to go through to get that well approved. Because it's gonna end up being 20 or 30 steps long. It might take away from the whole petition. Work up some different case scenarios. I'm a new restaurant, I need to get water. Buy into the system, what does that look like?
Or even like from the municipal side, like how they do buy and dry. I think that would be a cool piece to talk a little bit more about the ins and outs, how that works.
How many of you are involved in like case or change cases?
Yeah.
How's that process going?
We started in 2020 and we will probably get to actual court in 2025.
Similar?
We actually stopped ours. We were trying to bring water through for wastewater, and it was just taking too long. We stopped and didn't buy it.
Can I ask a favor, when everybody's talking, can you talk louder?
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's machines and stuff.
Yeah.
I do talk,
I
I
wanna
can
get-
look at you.
Yeah, I've got this voice that carries, but anyway, if I could talk a little louder, that'd be great, thank you. From the old guy.
No,
You're old guys.
I was done once.
Okay. Anything else on water law? There was some, yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I think both of these conversations are kind of tied forever. Well, they're all tied together forever and ever again. But the concept of the housing piece is obviously already an issue, and that's even before we're seeing the actual repercussions of the water decisions that are being made now. And then how does that tie into equity, and how do we make it accessible, not just affordable, but even possible for people to live here? And if you're working somewhere else, you're working in a place that pays you a cost of living for that place, but then you go elsewhere to live, that the cost of living is lower, then the people who work there then have to move further out, and then have to move further out, and have to move further out. And it's just like this kind of cycle of like, what are we gonna do? But I feel like the water law ties into that too, in that like the change of use, how do we make that, how do we get people to the table who are all invested in or interested, not even invested, but interested in like finding a way forward as a group, instead of like, if it doesn't benefit me 100%, I don't want to do it, right? Like, I feel like it kind of seemed like that a lot in a lot of the examples they were using. of like the litigation and all of that, that like, if it's not exactly what I want, not doing it at all. And I feel like it's just not reasonable, like, it's not possible for us to move forward that way, like, I'm okay if I get 70% of what I want, if you get 40%, and this guy gets 60%, and I'd love to get 100, right, but so would everybody. But how do we do that in a way that benefits the most amount of people, or the most amount of our land, or our like natural resources that aren't water, you know? How do we come together for that? And it seems, I mean, just looking at what this session like themes are, like, hopefully we get to that part too. Because I would like to feel a little bit more positive about it than I did after the law day. I was like, oh my God, guys, it's never gonna be fixed. But I think, I mean, really, like, you have to believe in the ability of people to come together and do things together sometimes. I feel like that moving forward is like, we're find the helpers, you know? That was my take. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people who don't want to participate if they're not getting everything they want. And that's just like being an adult, you know? So anyway, that was I was like, okay, we're gonna be happy about this. We're gonna find a way.
For sure. And it makes me think of, you know, just, and I've had some discussions about this with other colleagues of mine, but, you know, the principles of water law in the West, first in time, first in right. So automatically you're setting up a system that is not just. I mean, first people here were not actually white people, so, you know. And they're still, you know, trying to get tribal water rights are still a very contentious issue. There's struggles to get more tribal representation in water discussions and water management statewide and basin, you know, different basins. But, you know, first in time, first in right. So you've got agricultural users being the ones who have a lot of the oldest water rights. And as municipalities grow and different areas grow, and it's like, how do we do this more equitably? How do we come together as communities? And is there a way to distribute this resource more justly? And that's a big question that is happening right now. And I think regionally, like, yeah, we're struggling with how to do that because of this structure that we have. And I think there are examples of trying to, you know, collaborate regionally. The Northern Water Alliance is one. I'm excited to see, you know, what comes out of that group. And hopefully we'll have some time for the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado to talk about that a little bit. But yeah, it's a tricky situation when your whole structure, your water law is set up to essentially force conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like looking at the entire economics, macroeconomics of how, you know, we all want growth. We all need growth to perpetuate our way of life and the future's way of life. But does our economy have to be based on growth?
Yeah.
One of the things I think I keep coming back to doing this class and having these conversations and our own internal conversations for elements is the value of water. It's costs to put pipes in the ground and have water treatment plants and physically get water to the tap. But I'm of the opinion that water is a basic fundamental human right. Everybody should have access essentially no matter what, right? So if we charge for pipes and treatment plants.
Somebody's got to pay the bill.
Somebody's got to pay the bill.
If a city says, okay, we want to keep costs low, we'll pay that $20 million for this pipe coming in, right? And we don't charge one. But if we have to pay it ourselves, we have to pass it on to users, you know. And we had a big state session a week ago, and you know, 40% of our water district's land is developed, 60% that. And I made the point of, hey, our responsibility is to the current users. We got to keep people right here safe, reliable water. People don't realize it also, when you call the fire department doesn't help. They just send their equipment out. Somebody's got to get the water there. So that's got to be reliable. And then we have to look at keeping our financial status, we can't go broke. And then expansion is the next stage. People don't realize that costs money. To keep them maintained.
One of the things we've been having a conversation about internally for Collins is that pipe and treatment plants and all of that get into the tap of about 20% of the cost that we actually charge people. The other 80% is this valuation of our water rights portfolio, which is this big unknown of, okay, what's the value of something? Well, whatever someone's willing to pay for it,
How
right?
desperate they are.
Yeah.
But does that equation still stay the same if you have no intention of ever paying or ever selling it whatsoever? There's the cost of what it would be to go out and acquire those rights on the open market, but we already have acquired those rights. And if anything, we're going to buy more, we're never going to sell it. So is it fair to say our water valuation, our water rights portfolio has gone up 300%? Thus, we need to increase our fees 300% that we're charging somebody?
Yeah.
It becomes this kind of philosophical debate at a certain point of what is fair, what's equitable.
Right.
You get into housing affordability, you get into building, commercial friendliness
I
of
like it into
business.
diamonds. You're storing diamonds and you need
100%.
security, you need steel walls, you need.
But also, it turns out diamonds are plentiful as hell. And it's completely artificially inflated as a cost.
This is why I use it as an example. Yes.
Well, and as, government entities, what is the role of that? Providing water is a human right and having equitable access to water, so.
Because if we're just charging people that 20% that it actually costs us to get water to their tap,
But see, a
I don't know
city,
where the truth is.
a city, a state or a city like you has tax revenues, you can subsidize them. An independent water district, we have no way to get money except through
Rates.
the rates or charging fees, whatever that is. So this is, I don't know where equality comes in, or equity comes in, but that's, we're faced with our situation, you're faced with yours.
Because we're completely on the opposite side. We have, I think it's 2 to 3% left of developable.
Yeah, and
land.
we're pretty well full of, yeah.
So does that take the housing affordability argument off? Because there's basically no more houses left to be built.
You don't need more water, well,
Unless you start increasing density and infill and all of that, yeah, it's a long way of saying that's the core question I keep asking myself in this class. What's the value of water?
That is determined by us, right?
Ultimately, yeah.
I mean, society. Other thoughts?
I know that this is completely related, but you do notice that we are seeing houses are kind of steadying out in terms of sales right now too, so there's a huge impact going on. I don't know what that's gonna do for future development in the area as well. We live and die by all these different factors, right?
The state demographer has kind of come out. I can't remember if they have a kind of a day-long kind of seminar thing, but last few years, it's been a huge in-migration of very young people. In fact, Elizabeth Garner was on driving, listening. But it's mostly people who are, graduating from college to young families who are moving here. And that trend hasn't stopped the last few years. In all honesty, I moved here from Washington State. Colorado is one of the biggest suckers of Washingtonians. Same thing with Californians. I'm not originally from Washington State, but so, I think that trend hasn't stopped because we have good high-paying jobs. But that gap between the housing costs of living and what people are making, and then that gap between those high-paying jobs and all the other jobs is getting bigger. And so there's a whole nother side of this that's, we're just kind of, we're talking about the cost of parts that go into making a car, not how the car drives, not all of its bells and whistles and all those other things that make life wonderful. Sorry, I use a lot of metaphors. My dad was a car dealer, so cars don't come out a lot. But I think the idea behind it is that water is a huge, it's the engine, it's the oil that goes in the engine. I mean, it's one of those essential parts that makes life move. And so if you can't fix things associated with water that have these equity issues, then you won't fix the equity issues. They'll just get worse, And I think that, I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer, but We are kind of in a dire straight situation, and if we don't figure it out, people will be paying that $1 million for their first house, and it's not unheard of in parts of our country, so it's crazy. So, yeah.
Right, well, I think with that, Brad is going to address all of our questions with his time here. But I'm really excited to introduce Brad Wynn, who is the general manager of Northern Water. I'll just read a little bit of his bio here. He is a native of Colorado. He was raised on an irrigated farm on the South Platte River in Washington County and had his college education at Fort Lewis College in Durango, and then attended Colorado State University to do a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Engineering and Civil Engineering. He then attended graduate school at University of California, Davis, and got a Master of Science in Agricultural Engineering in 1993, and more recently got a Master of Business Administration degree from CSU in 2005. He remains active in production agriculture through his interest in his farm near Snyder, Colorado, and he's a registered professional engineer in the states of California and Colorado. So thanks very much, Brad. We'll have a lot of discussion. So thanks for opening us up here.
First line, the last line. Yeah, I don't know. Jump over to it. Okay. Well, good morning. Really enjoyed the conversation thus far. A couple takeaways for me are, why are people moving to Colorado? What I find fascinating in our little neighborhood, we live in West Loveland, grandparents are following their grandchildren.
Don't do that.
Well, I'm not trying to do that. I don't have kids.
Don't do it. They know well.
Our new neighbors often, I mean, I think 50% of our new neighbors are in their later 60s and 70s, and they've come from other states. Why are you here? Because our grandkids are here. I think it's a fascinating move. I think we're seeing that in a lot of different places. Well, again, welcome. First, thank you for taking time to learn more about water. It's the most illogical thing in our state, I find. And if you find yourself perplexed at why things are the way they are, I've been in Northern Water for 31 years. There's not a day that goes by I don't ask myself, why is that the way it is? And it's in Colorado, perhaps more so than any other state. It's a combination platter, right? It's a lot of history, it's policy, it's politics, uncertainty of natural resources, kind of all that baked together creates a pathway where things are illogical. How we use water, how it's administered, prior appropriation, except in some places, it goes on, and we're need to be students our entire career about water. Karen's heard me say this before, and we're being recorded, so I have to be cautious. But in my view, water is kind of like talking about religion. Kind of weird. It's probably nothing's perfectly right. I don't know how many attorneys we might have in the room that would disagree with that, but nothing's perfectly right. Nothing's probably perfectly wrong. We all grew up with, well, I shouldn't say all of us. I was better about religious things when I was younger. Now my parents are disappointed in my church goings. But nonetheless, a lot of history and embedded within how we talk about water is our own biases. And I encourage you to think about that, because I have a lot of biases as I talk about water. And I would challenge you to just raise your hand and say, Brad, that is bunk. But we have those biases based on a lot of things, right? I was raised in Eastern Colorado, large farming operation, surrounded by beef cattle. That caused bias. I went to a small high school in Eastern Colorado. That's got bias. I spent way too many years in college. That provided me a bias. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a bias. It's how I look at the world. I don't have children. That creates bias. I've been at Northern Water for 31 years. Believe you me, that creates bias. I have different ways of thinking about things because I spend a lot of time with my colleagues like Jeff, our former general manager, Eric Wilkinson, who was here for 30 plus years. And that creates bias, and that's often how I view the world, as though it should be all things Northern Water, but it often is not. I spent the month of July at Harvard in a class, and that recent experience caused bias in my life and the way I look at things. So as I talk about things, please, if you think my biases are a little bit off their rocker, let's just stop and visit about it. So we've got 35 minutes or so. Karen, is that right?
But then we've got 20 minutes after that for discussion.
Great.
So we've got lots of time.
So please stop me anytime. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about just kind of the core of what Northern Water does. As I've thought more about kind of walking over here, I'm in another building. Kind of what's unique about Northern Water is, and this is to your earlier discussion, is we're a regional organization. And so kind of all I've ever known is thinking about northeastern Colorado as a region, and perhaps more so in the last 5 years or so, I've recognized that not everybody, for better or for worse, sees it that way. You've all got your roles in your communities, and it is sometimes challenging for an organization like Northern Water to promote its regional thinking. I'm not arguing it's better, but that's who we are, with all the things you're doing within your own, dare I say, silos of keeping water running and keeping your economy going and so on and so forth. But that's our think, and that's how we got formed. So I want to talk about a couple of our projects. The yellow are things yet to come this afternoon. I think you'll be the Windy Gap Firming Project. You'll hear from Jeff Drager, I believe, and the Northern Integrated Supply Project. You'll hear from the program manager for that effort, from Carl Brower. And then it's always fun. I want to make sure that you leave with as much of a headache as I have and talk about room challenges, because that's where the fun is, maybe, but you need to be thinking about it. So let's step back in time and kind of the basics 101 of Northern Water. Our district, so we're a Conservancy district. Conservancy district law was created in 1937. Northern Water was the first Conservancy district in the state. And so our peeps, the people I look to, and our board looks to, our board of 13, we have 3 board members from the Front Range counties within our district. Our district spanning from part of the city and county of Broomfield. Why do I say part? What did half of the city and county of Broomfield used to be? Half of the city and county of Broomfield used to be Weld County and Boulder County. Those counties, among 5 others, are defined as being part of Northern Water. So that's why I say in the southern edge, city and county of Broomfield at 120th, north to just north of Wellington, following the tributaries, the primary tributaries coming out of the hills, the Cooter, Big Thompson, the St. Brendan, Boulder Creek. And then when you get to Greeley, our district narrows. Why is that? Our district was really formed around the irrigated acres that were in existence in 1937. It narrows and follows the South Platte by Snyder. How many people have been to Snyder, Colorado? No need to go to Snyder, Colorado. You just don't need, no one, you don't just go to Snyder to go to Snyder. But anyway, it's in Morgan County. Kind of follows those irrigated acres out to Nebraska. And so the recognition was, well before 1937, is this part of our state at that time? 1937 was recognized 2 decades before that was water short. Pretty much all the water, frankly, had been developed by 1937, more or less. There's still opportunities to carve off a little bit of from peak flows. Times in which the call on the river goes junior, or there's no call, free river. those opportunities still exist, but they don't exist as like they would have in 1900. So in 1937, we are water short. What was the definition of water short then? Primarily was we're in a challenging time over our 600,000 irrigated acres of finishing crops. It was all about agriculture. But come August and September, there wasn't much water left, much native supplies or base supplies, we call them here at Northern Water, non-important supplies to finish those crops. What do you think, region? We understand there's water on the West Slope. Excess, unappropriated. We'll call it stealing, it's just unappropriated supplies. And at that point, a combination of Northern Water had an interest. Bureau Reclamation, our federal partner in much of the project, was promoting developing lands in the West, primarily bringing new lands into production, irrigated acres in the 17 Western states. And Northern Water paired up with Bureau Reclamation, Northern Water being the sponsor for the Colorado Big Thompson project. Sponsor, which means in this case, we pay half the freight.
Was that unappropriated water within Colorado? Like the state unappropriated water versus like Colorado River
And yes.
allocations to other states?
And at that time, like today, we would argue, at least some of us in Colorado would say we're still under our appropriated amount under the compact.
Right.
Just in time, Wes. Good morning. There was kind of recognition of water there, lots of snow there, not as much demand, a lot of agriculture in northeastern Colorado. Please.
Did the farmers buy the water rights over there before they started the project?
Colorado, you don't buy water rights. You file a water right application.
Okay.
That process is, I'm not gonna say it's free by any stretch, but you don't, at that time, now I'm gonna hint to some things that life's different now. At that time, unappropriated water, you file a water right, prove a beneficial use, do a few other things, and it's considered yours.
So the Bureau of Reclamation
It was
gave
free water? You didn't have to pay for, you just,
In Colorado, you don't, I mean, at the core of our ability through our constitution to divert and put water beneficial use is there's not a duty to that water. You're freaking about that, Karen, I can tell.
well, yeah, I mean, in today's world, you don't really think about that because it doesn't exist really, right, anymore?
No, we could go down to the courthouse. We could file a
A junior.
2023 water right on the South Platte.
Should never get.
We could define beneficial use. We could identify some irrigated acres. We could identify something. It could be, although in today's world, that idea of beneficial use is quite a bit broader than it was in 1937. And when you were in priority, after getting a decree, there's nothing easy about that. But at the end of the day, the water that you're diverting under 2023 water right does not cost you on a per gallon basis. A lot to think about. Short on water, let's go to the West Slope. Reclamation was supporting these concepts, and Northern Water's created to pay for half of that project. I'd say half of it because the project has a lot of hydropower facilities. So it produces water and it produces power. Northern Water pays for the water part of it. So most facilities that bring water from the West Slope to northeastern Colorado, Northern Water pays 50% of the bill. And we paid for our cost of the project which was substantially less because of a contract that was in place than multiple project costs that we've since paid off the CBT project. So a little bit about the operations. Again, the water comes from the West Slope. It's primarily snow melt on Rocky Mountain National Park, more or less. If you go a little bit west of Granby, let's go to the collection facility of the Colorado Big Thompson project. And remember, a lot of this is owned by the federal government. Over the years, Northern Water has acquired a bit more of the project, not a lot. Ownership of a dam is not always considered maybe the best thing in the long run. It comes with responsibilities. So the federal government still owns much of the project. However, on the west slope, Northern Water operates the collection system. There's about 24 staff over there that are headquartered in a campus up toward Willow Creek Reservoir. And primarily what that staff does is as that snow is melting, water's coming off of Rocky Mountain National Park or Willow Creek during the months of May, June, often into July. They're capturing that water, working very closely with Bureau Reclamation, and really primarily getting it positioned into the primary storage vessel of the Colorado Thompson project. And that goes on for roughly 3 months. Capture, 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 sometimes capture and spill. It's not a bad thing. It's unfortunate this spill doesn't bring water to the east slope. The spill goes down the Colorado River. We've got challenges there, so we might as well contribute, but it spills because the project's full. And that's a good place to be.
So defining spill means Granby's full.
Granby's full.
Okay.
Yep, no more room in the inn. So that water's headed west, we're topped off. And after those 3 months occur, more or less, then staff's challenge is getting that water repositioned to the east slope. A lot of coordination with reclamation. So water gets moved from Lake Granby and from Willow Creek into Shadow Mountain. That requires pumping. So there's a large pump plant called FAR Pumping Plant that lifts that water roughly 100 feet in elevation. Once it's in Shadow Mountain, it can flow by gravity through Shadow Mountain, through a connecting channel into Grand Lake. And from Grand Lake, it's released through the Adams Tunnel, which goes under the Continental Divide, pops out right above Estes Park, right at YMCA, right beyond YMCA, where it is. And from there, it goes through 5 power plants that are minute by minute managed by reclamation. Some of them are peaking plants, so they run when we're up and doing our thing and needing power. They don't run at night. Some of them are run of the river power plants, and that power is generated. It moves out into the marketplace by a sister agency of reclamation called Western Area Power Administration, which is Department of Interior versus Energy versus the Department of Interior. So that's marketed. I think I could say we all enjoy that power, directly or indirectly. Either if you're on an REA or you're with the city of Fort Collins, that power finds its way into the marketplace in northeastern Colorado, parts of Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming from these facilities. Some of those plants you can't see, kind of in remote locations. The one that I probably see the best is coming into Estes Park. You go by Lake Estes, which is part of the project. That's an afterbay of their Estes power plant. You go right by that, and if you look for, to me, it'd be in the northwest corner, very concrete building. That's what reclamation did. They did a lot of concrete buildings. And in that facility is 3 units, 3 hydropower units. Again, that's a peaking plant. So you'll see Lake Estes daily going up and down. And then from there, that water is released to the power conduit, ultimately find its way through other power plants and to a place where it's bifurcated and sent to either Carter Lake, which requires a pump to lift it to Carter Lake, or it's headed north to Horsetooth, with some deliveries in between. But that's really the goal of getting it to those 2 locations. And from that point, from that point, water is delivered to treatment plants, Fort Collins, Loveland Water District, North Weld Water District, Elko, East Lumber County Water District. Here in the south end off of Carter, the Bill Thompson Water District, or to Central Weld Water District. In addition to that, over the years, we built facilities that take that water south to communities near Broomfield, as far east as Fort Morgan. Again, delivering it to filter plants, but also we can deliver to the nearby streams during the irrigation season, water directly from the CBT project to supplement needed supplies. And those irrigation supplies are usually delivered to the river, downstream, or sometimes by exchange upstream. That water is used for food production. Some statistics on the project, kind of by really all comparisons. The CBT project isn't the biggest federal project in the West by any stretch, but it's pretty complex with the power production, repositioning the water through the Continental Divide. As of recent, we have just a little over 1 million residents within our district, and think Broomfield to Wellington to Julesburg, Colorado, just over 1 million. Jeff, was there 115 or 150,000 when we got?
150.
150.
In 57.
So 1937, 150,000 folks. So
Wow.
to your earlier discussion, life's been changing.
How many irrigated acres?
Pardon?
How many irrigated acres is that?
Probably 820.
Yeah, not much more, because again, this water was meant for existing farms.
Was your assumption that it'd be much less or much more?
I was wondering if it got reduced, yeah.
All right, we're building on the lands. Yeah, so it's slowly getting carved away in the front range. Although not surprisingly, a lot of the new development's not happening on irrigated grounds, which presents some added challenges in my opinion.
Delivery.
Well, to get at the heart of the matter, it's in a perfect world. We don't live in that perfect world, but if it has a native supply, as it gets developed, the presumption might be that Wes is shaking his head, yes, there's some opportunity to use that native supply, either bring it into your portfolio and treat it, not always possible. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to chew. But at a minimum, in my opinion, try to bring it into your portfolio and use it for dual use systems, i.e. landscaping or other water needs within your community. But we're building a lot of homes on dry land.
Yeah.
My theory of that is, and this is biased, I'm not sure this is right, dry land acres in northeastern Colorado are the highest acres by elevation, right? Because you couldn't get water for irrigation, they were too high. You couldn't get canals, you couldn't get gravity to take water there, but they make for nice views.
Oh, yeah.
So kind of a
Makes
conundrum.
sense.
It's just a theory. Let's see. So we bring over about a little over 200,000 acre feet a year on average. It swings vastly for reasons I'll mention in a moment. Again, that's just the CBT supply and a lot of years to build. We've got war, depression, global challenges. The project came online full tilt in 1957. Again, I mentioned it's complex. A lot of folks involved, not all of the Northern Water folks on a daily basis. Again, for that power piece, I have a super appreciation for folks who generate power. It takes a lot of talent. Things happen in nanoseconds. Water years, we think water years can take a long time, but in the power industry, we've got to keep the grid going because all of us are pulling power off that grid. So perhaps not surprising over the years, that trend in ownership. So how we think of things at Northern Water, there are 310,000 shares, we call them units, of CBT water. 310,000. Kind of a wacky number, but it was based on the fact that the engineers at the time thought that the project was going to yield not 215,000 acre feet, but 310. They're a little optimistic, but in fact, the project didn't get fully built the way it was envisioned. It was meant to capture a little bit more water up Strawberry Creek, down further on the Colorado River, and those elements of the project didn't get built. So it got kind of right-sized, if you will. to provide less. So at the time, the thought was, come to Northern Water, acquire a unit or more, got to show beneficial use, it's mostly agriculture, and that one unit will equate to 1 acre foot. Now the project got right sized. So you have to have some mechanism in which to ration water. And one of the most important things our board does every year, this board of 13, I don't know if I finished that story. So 3 board members from the Front Range counties, populated counties, plus 1 from now, just got a new board member 2 years ago, from the city and county of Broomfield, and then eastern counties get 1 board member by decree. 1 board member actually shares Morgan County and a little sliver of Washington County where my homeland was. And they come together in April. They talk about it through the course of the year. They come together in April and they evaluate what the supplies, the native supplies are in the region, what do reservoirs look like, what soil moisture look like, snowpack, anticipated runoff, the people that are lobbying for higher or lower amounts of what we call quota, which is the rationing to go from 310 down to what the region needs. But the whole idea that we're adding the supplemental supply, and in so doing, we want to bring the region's supply up to a full supply. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. When we have a really good, rich water year, big snowpack, our board sets a lower quota because the region doesn't need it. It's going to be okay with the native supply. So it might set a 50% quota. So that equates to a ½ acre foot per unit of contract ownership of the project. What year you get less? Very different than virtually every other similar project in the West. Usually if you got more water, you allocate more water. CBT, it's different than that, which gives us a lot of comfort in how to moderate the supplies. And in a very dry year, the board might push hard and say, staff, we need to go up to 90 or 100% quota.
Is that because of storage capacity or?
Just needs of the region.
No, okay.
Again, your native supplies are down. We want to try to find another supply to make every year look like a water adequate year. Our county documents talk about 1927. 1927 was a year that, when studied, folks thought, if we can make every year look like 1927, it was a water-rich year, we were golden. And so, in some ways, that's what the project attempts to do. So the trends in ownership, again, not a shocker, big ownership by agriculture from day one and through the 70s, 80s, and virtually every month. There's acquisitions by municipal and industrial users from agriculture. It's not that those farms, in most cases, aren't being farmed anymore or irrigated or growing food. It's the fact they're doing it without CBT. So they're using their non-CBT supplies. Again, their native South Platte, Hooter, Big Thompson, whatever it might be, water supplies to get that done. Probably not as reliably, probably not grown as much bushels of corn, but for lots of reasons, they've elected to sell that asset and get on with their life. Karen.
How common is it to sell the native water?
It's becoming concerningly more common. Let me get there.
Okay.
That's a looming challenge, but it's a criteria in order to use CBT, more or less, not in every single case. You have to marry it up with a native supply. Just by definition, CBT is defined as a supplemental supply. Again, we didn't go out and break new ground. We weren't Washington or California. Not that that's bad, but the project was really designed to supplement existing supply. So in order to obtain CBT, you need to prove up the fact that you've got a native supply to merit it with CBT. So that ability to move CBT, unlike any other water supply, I think it's safe to say in Colorado, doesn't go through a change case. Northern Water can move that water either by ownership or on a lease basis an annual lease basis, can move that water with a phone call from the Cooter on one day to Boulder Creek the next day. Infrastructure's in place to do that. It makes for a pretty valuable water supply to acquire. It's pretty easy vending machine, so to speak, when you need a couple more acre feet. You've got development coming online, you've got a new industry to acquire CBT from an agriculturalist, and boom, it's yours. It goes to a board approval process, and then you have access to use it. You're grimacing, Julie.
Oh, I'm just listening. I'm really trying to take
That's
this
her
all in.
listening
It's very
It's
confusing.
it's odd. It's very unique in the West.
Yeah.
Very unique, but a good unique, I think.
Brad, in the 10 years from 2010 to 2020, went up by a factor of 8 or so. What happened that caused that tremendous spike? Just demand or?
Demand.
That's shocking.
We had a couple dry years through there, and again, it's dare I say, it's the drug of choice. It's pretty easy peasy to make those acquisitions, not cheap, but easy. But we all can appreciate the fact that those 310,000 units, every time there's a transfer from ag to municipality, you're getting a less of a pool of available units to acquire. So the candy store probably is going to be closed someday, and that gives Northern Water a lot of reason to think about what's going to replace that. And later today, you'll hear about Windy Gap Burning and the importance of the region to fill a bit of that gap, and then also NISP and water conservation. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we need to work together on to provide the water supply that's going to be needed for the grandparents coming to, right? Once you missed that, Joe. Do you know any grandparents coming to Colorado to follow their grandkids? You don't, that's the only people I meet anymore.
And Brad, also a question also, the Western Slope water coming through Granby Lake and all that.
Yeah.
The CDP project, once it's used, it goes into the eastern side, just runs down the Flat River into the Mississippi or something. Is there any demand for California to say, hey, wait a minute, we're loading you that water?
We never admit,
Okay,
and we use it to extinction before it gets to Nebraska.
okay. Hence Nebraska wanting to come in here and.
Yeah, for lots of reasons. One, Nebraska is not mentioned in the Colorado River Compact. So Nebraska cannot be a beneficiary.
They were part of the Platte River Compact too, isn't it?
There's a South Platte Compact, correct?
Okay.
Yep.
And the governor of Nebraska is threatening to put a pipeline into Colorado to take water out of the country. Julesburg is stealing all that water.
Yep, you're right on.
That's the native, that's South Platte River water supply though. This is,
I realize that I'm not thinking in the macro of water in Colorado. It's just,
Yeah.
The water, to answer some of your question, and I'm being a little bit cynical about none of it's Nebraska. We do everything we can to use it here. And the South Platte is a hardworking river. When we talk about the Cooter working hard, I'm a South Platte kid. Water gets used many, many times before it gets to Julesburg. So the excess that occurs from the use of CBT, and you all know as we bring water into our house, 94% of it goes down the toilet, down the sink, down the shower, and it gets treated and it's on its way. And sometimes you can use that water for other purposes as a utility. In the case with CBT, for reasons I better not get into, you can't. Dedicated for uses downstream. That's by contract. And we spend a lot of time tracking CBT on every given day, where it's going, understanding how long it stays in their system, Fort Collins' a system, and a day later it comes out 2 treatment plants in that example. We're tracking that. We want to make sure. What do we want to make sure of? The pirates from the south, people who are reaching north into our service area and buying water supplies or filing water rights, it's not to be theirs. So we track it so we can protect it for our own.
So you're gonna get a bunch of hands.
It's good. It's good.
So you talk about this exportation.
I didn't put you in Pirates of the South. Hudson's not
No,
part of the
we
South.
got pirates. We do have heard,
Yeah.
Southeast Will County, signed up by a city that will remain nameless in
Oh,
El Paso
name.
County.
Yeah.
Like Castle Rock.
Yeah.
They bought almost 3 sections of land, all with box elder rights. That's our data source in Hudson. We have alluvial resources at a box elder creek. That's our forever water. It's kind of how we, but when you talk about first in time, first and right and all that stuff, it's like, oh, we gotta get wells in the ground. Gosh, Castle Rock's coming, they're gonna take our water. And there is a threat there. And I also wonder if there's some consideration from the board when they're setting quotas, even though I know it's been a great year and they're setting it at 50, knowing there's kind of this, suckage of exportation of our water going somewhere else. I mean, that's a hard, you're not supplemental that way. I get that, but I mean, it's gotta be kind of a scary fact for your board as
Much is, and we're engaged with our board and ultimately, and if you happen to come tomorrow, you're going to see a presentation by our colleague Pat Wells to kind of better understand what that phenomenon is. It's not an illegal act. You can buy water throughout our state, but it has implications, and that's not theory. That's matter of fact. We've got lots of examples around our state as to what happens when water gets acquired, not unappropriated water, because people say, well, northern water, you're stealing water from West Slope. How can you say that? Unappropriated water, and what we're talking about here is the acquisition of our base supplies. And where my mind goes is for our grandkids, that's grandkids. I don't have kids, I'm not talking about grandkids, but our grandkids, what do they want Northeastern Colorado to look like? Now, maybe they don't think beef is the best thing, because we use most for water, for food production. People can debate about beef. Jeff and I have colleagues here that I can appreciate their dietary, more thoughtful diet than I have. Let's put it that way. But if you step back a little bit, is kind of a question about, in my view, is, okay, maybe we farm that way in the future, maybe we don't. That water is the fundamental building block of an economy. Whatever you can, kind of wildest think about an economy in Northeastern Colorado and where your grandkids might want to take it, I'm going to argue it takes water for the environment, for new homes, for new industry. I think food's kind of important, but that's my bias. That's where I come from. So the point being, as this water gets acquired within our district to be extracted and taken south, we should just ask ourselves, is that important to us or not? And if so, I don't have a magic bullet. I don't know how you solve that problem, but I think we should be talking about it. Is there another question, Ben?
Yeah, I just had a question. We saw the big spike over the past decade in TBT prices, right? During that time, how much of the acquisition was from municipalities?
It's probably over the last, say, 5 years, I would say 85% of it's been municipalities. The balance of acquisitions has been industry.
So, kind of going to the conversation about Fort Collins and some of how they value their water rights. I mean, they're the ones, a lot of these developers are then asked to bring water to their project. And I was actually surprised. I had a neighbor who was selling some CBT, and I went to some developer friends and said, hey, you guys be interested? And they said, no, it's too expensive. But really, the municipalities are driving the price increases, not the developers, right? I mean,
well, somebody has to pay for it. So if the cost is 70, if the cost is 75, somebody's got to pay for it.
Yeah, but Fort Collins will make a developer bring water to the project as well, right? Their own water. So they have water that they've been buying, and then they say, okay, developer, you bring more water for your project. But that water gets inflated in price so much because the municipalities are buying 85% of it themselves. So the market's skewed at some level because you have
Yeah, if you don't mind, Brad. So I was involved with Road Trail back in the day when it jumped from 10 to 12. And my wife thought North Sheriff was crazy by buying huge blocks of it. But I will say this, Brad, you actually, it's a great reminder for me that it probably is the easiest and not the less expensive. But when you talk about a process, when I work on the development side, with large developers as well as the municipal side. You're right, the Bureau in Northern have created a path by which it is probably one of the most straightforward, cleanest ways to acquire water and to bring it into your water portfolio in any water. I've chased in 20, 25 years in Colorado. So the process is relatively simple, like literally within 40 days, by the time I get it, call Northern, get on the next board agenda, get the transfer thing done. It is so easy to do that when developers are looking at their torsion runs and their rates, when they start looking at what that door cost is, instead of speculating on water court, how to get it, out of one place, what's the historic records, how to go to water court.
Water quality.
Yeah, all the way, yeah, water quality is huge. It's like CBT is the cleanest, easiest water to get from a pipe to a home, to be honest with you. And that's what makes it's the convenience factor, no offense, that makes people willing to chase the price to get it.
Yeah.
Well, but not people, municipalities.
So we don't buy seed.
No?
We don't do that. We make developers buy it.
Yeah, so it's developers that are driving it from our perspective.
Yeah, so I think the key is yes.
But you just said 85%.
I'm sorry, I've got it.
The key is that it's going to municipal use.
It's a pass-through.
But it's not a.
I just counter. And I'm not.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
But your community
We have
approves,
seed.
no, where I'm going is your community approves that development envelope. So I kind of beg to differ that, well, it's the developer doing everything. We make these decisions as a community. There's a proposal to develop 80 acres of land that goes through your processes. And therein lies an accelerator to acquire the water, demand for water, and associated costs. So I'm just going back up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think, Michael, what's really hard to answer your question is every community is so different. Fort Collins has this very rich portfolio of water supplies, wonderful 150 years of buying at the right time, not just buying it, but appropriating for senior water supplies back in the day, versus communities that are kind of just getting started. And it's kind of just a different challenge to different communities. I'm going to, if I can, just say a few more things.
Yeah.
And so CBT was the only game in town from 1957 till the Windy Gap project came online in 1985. Why Windy Gap? There was recognition primarily from leadership at the city of Longmont, but that leadership, that concept expanded of, hey, we're using the CBT a little bit more aggressively for purposes that we didn't exactly envision. And that was, I think, probably some in 1937 thought this water will be used primarily for agriculture in perpetuity. Well, for the market that Wes describes, that transition has happened. Longmont leadership, among leadership from Fort Collins, Greeley, Loveland, and Estes Park, came together and said, there's still more water over there that's available, unappropriated water. Let's file another water right. They did. That's called the Windy Gap project. So it's a junior water on the Colorado River. It has a pumping plant between Hot Sulphur Springs and Granby, right on the Colorado River. Only dam across the Colorado River in Colorado, except for Granby, I guess, but that's a little upstream. Jeff's going to talk a lot about how that project's changing with the addition of Chimney Hollow. And so I won't talk about that, but nonetheless, it brings over another 20 to 30,000 acre feet. It really brings it through the same infrastructure, more or less, that the CBT project used. So for federal projects in the West, there's excess capacity. You can lease capacity from the federal government. So Windy Gap, in essence, leases capacity to get water through the tunnel, get it through the hydro plants, get it into Horseshoe and Carter, and from there, Windy Gap gets to be used by now, Jeff, 18 participants, combination of both. Jeff Drager will talk about the firming project. Not all Windy Gap participants are in the firming project. But think about the magnitude. When we talk about CBT, allottees, as we call them, owners of allotment contracts, there's about 1,500 of them. A lot of individual farmers, of course, communities. When you're in these more recent projects, like Winnie Gap, originally there was just 5. And over the years, that interest in those have been sold, and now there's, I think it's 18 or 17. That's Winnie Gap. Okay, in 2 minutes, Karen, let's talk about what gives me a headache every day. Colorado River. A lot of uncertainty we need to really dial in on. We shouldn't overlook the fact that Mother Nature was very good to us last year. We need 20 last years to get things back in the position, in the state in which they need to be for Powell and McNeil. So hydrology seems to be freakazoid these days, and we should figure out ways to hedge against that uncertainty. That means a lot of different ways. You need to think about demand, but sometimes I don't think we talk enough about. You need to think about supply, to try to firm supplies. In most every case, requires a storage vessel. That's just how you get a supply from 1 month, from one day into the next day. So.
Not energy.
Pardon? So Colorado River, heavy on our mind here at Northern Water. I'm going to skip through this. You know, and we should just all state the river really hasn't produced like our forefathers. Blame it on our forefathers, right, Karen? They were a little optimistic. So, okay, I mean, it's good to be optimistic, but the river is not performing like we initially thought it was. And then in the last 21 years, it's kind of messy. But let's never forget these bars, use in the lower basins, consumptive use, and use up here in the blue, up here, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico. Let me just ask a simple question. Those bars don't look like a fair share, right? We're supposed to split the water with the lower basin. So we can fight on about that later. Let me strengthen my concern about folks looking in our backyard for their supplies. Go around the state. Let's just cut in half. Look at the left side. What's that? That's the west slope. That's west of Continental Divide. Those dogs over there have done a phenomenal job of, in fact, it's embedded within the water plan of really not one more drop. We look to the future. We shouldn't be looking west. I just think that's unrealistic. Good for them. When I took this job 5 years ago, I told the board, if you're looking for somebody to develop more spots in the West Slope, I ain't your guy. Again, they've done that, hard work, politics, and they've galvanized positions and a mantra which more or less makes it almost impossible to get more from West Slope. It's there to some degree, but we're not going to go there. Okay, so again, if you're in the Front Range, you're growing, you're looking for your next supply, West Slope's off, doing their own thing, no water there. Come around, what's the Rio Grande done? You hear about the Rio Grande? Talk about galvanizing a position. For now, probably about 25, 28 years, there's been threats of taking water out of the Rio Grande by the Southern Metro. Those folks are livid. They pack heat when they talk about water, and that water's not leaving the valley. So good for them. Arkansas, what's the deal there? There's not a lot of water left. Colorado's taking it all. Colorado Springs has got a big demand. There's no water left in the metro area, so where are you going to look? In our backyard, Julie. Okay, that keeps me up at night. I love this picture right here. I shared this with one of my Aurora friends. Aurora's very aggressively buying water in the South Platte. This is a picture from Crowley County, about 7 years ago. Tumbleweeds grow really well on dried up farms. They get the snowplows out to push off the tumbleweeds. So anyway, the threat's there. We've talked about challenges of development. I won't talk about that boring subject. Fire in our forests, our watersheds need help. Changing climate perhaps, but I would kind of question how we're managing or lack of managing of some of our forest lands. And that fuel just keeps loading and loading, and boom, you have the troublesome fire. and Cameron Peak that were extremely challenging for the user of Maputer and for our collection system. And that all happened in 2020. Another challenge, something I think about. Trying to hire people lately. I've been here 31 years, and then it's just a changing times. Jeff, I don't think anybody's gonna come to Northern Water State for 31 years. That's not even helpful. But the fact is, the former previous generation and the generation before that, they kind of locked in. And why that's important in an industry like ours, I think collectively, is we're not making widgets. You can make 10,000 widgets in a day. Just, I'm not going to downplay manufacturing, but if you get good at making a widget, you can get good in about 2 hours and you make 10,000 widgets a day. When you're in the water business, you got 30, if you start young, you get 35 times to do it right. Because it's an annual cycle. Collect it, move it, store it, get it allocated, put it to people like Wes, conserve it, do good things with it, all that, and you start again. You're only going to do that 30 times, 35 times if you're lucky. So you got to get folks to come in and stay, and they're not. They're just not. I don't know, they just, oh, Brad, I'm moving to New York next year. Why the hell do you want to move to New York? You work for Northern Water. Yeah, so we talked about challenges with hydrology and I'm sorry, Karen.
No, we're.
Brad, one weakness I see or limitation I see on this map, everything's dependent upon those tunnels. Everything happens to know we got to see. What are the plans for that? It could be either natural disaster, sabotage, software, computer, everything could just, if the water stops coming to those tunnels, East Colorado's got a problem.
It's a bad day.
Yeah.
We instead of give you 100% certainty. Some of it relates to 9/11. Post 9/11, when you work with the federal government, there's a lot of awareness of kind of who's lurking. We now have 221 cameras at last count, looking at
But things could happen, and I could name, I was on some federal boards after 9/11, some of them, and, a lot of things have happened, but there's still a lot of weaknesses. If anything happened, is there any plan for a redundant tunnel or something to back that up?
Well, let me bolster my argument that I think we're in a good place. Also, what the federal government, what Bureau of Reclamation does particularly well, is they work with us to evaluate the status, the need for any replacement on a regular basis. A lot of the infrastructure is inspected annually in terms of wear and tear, and we make reinvestments when necessary, us and the power customers, we're sharing in that obligation, and the project's in amazingly good shape. Let me give you an example where we realized that we had a weakness. Carter Lake used to have just one gate that went to water users that down south, the Boulder Reservoir, St. Vrain, Big Thompson River, and also into our Southern Water Supply Project pipeline. One gate, bad idea. We got probably 600,000 people that rely on that one gate. And now we put in about 14 years ago, there's a new tower out in the reservoir that feeds into that same system. And some of you might be aware, we're having similar conversations because we have the same weakness at Horseshoe. And we need to make that investment so you can get water out of the reservoir in more than one.
You gotta get the water to that reservoir. If anything happens to that pipe, you got a bad, as you said, you got a bad day.
Yeah. Tunnel's good.
Tunnel's good.
Tunnel's good.
But things happen.
Yeah. The hydro plants, if they go south, and we had a couple of examples of that in my career. Again, mostly reclamation staff. There's bypasses around every hydro plant to get the water down.
I just have a clarification question about the CBT water use. We can only use it once?
Right.
We can use it
Once.
exactly.
It's complicated.
Okay.
Once. You can only use CBT once. That was negotiated more or less, but it's in our contract because those grumpy guys out east, probably my grandfather, said, we're not going to support an ad valorem tax to build a project if we don't get some. Well, what do you want? We want all the return flows from the Front Range. boom, done. They voted for it. 97% of people voted for building the project because in essence, Greenland East get that return flow more or less from when you're taking a shower. Windy Gap, not the story. You can use it and use it to extinction. Use it as many times as you want to use it. You can capture it at your treatment plant. You can market it. You can exchange it upstream, maybe to your collection reservoir. You can use it for, like Broomfield does, for landscaping needs. You can use it all.
Or let Fort Collins use it first, before you use it at your power plant.
Right.
And they have to put it in.
Fort Collins uses it and sends it up to Rawhide. Yeah, perfect example.
We were talking about the last piece about people, the jobs and hiring, you know, and everything. And we were having that conversation on the way over. We feel like there's the generation that came behind all of these people, that, you know, Carol's, and we're not replacing them. What do you propose? And what do you guys look at? I mean, in terms of proposing, trying to get people, you know, these next few generations to go into those fields, because you really are going to need people to buy in and stay around for it.
Yeah.
What is, I guess, is anything being done in the field of water? Is there anything like encouraging, you know, students in high school or college students, you know, those kind of things to look into this field of work?
I'm trying to get conversations with the school here in Berthoud, in fact, Northern Water, Little Thompson Water District, the town of Berthoud, and Bureau of Reclamation, we have all agreed out to the side, hey, we'd like to offer a series to, you know, like a 1-week series to a class at Berthoud. Just, and you all who might have kids might understand this better than I do. That's all well and good, but it's hard to make that connection and make it actually happen in school. But we should keep trying. Trade schools, I mean, the folks that, yeah, we have a bunch of smart engineers, right, Jeff? We talk too much and blah, blah, blah. People who make stuff happen here at Northern Water, they're skater people, they're field people. I mean, they're trades people, and they're wonderful what they do, and we should kind of find a way to get those folks, provide schooling to bring them in and they hit the ground running.
One last one. So how is land use, what's the responsibility for those of us who interface with land use decisions as it intersects with water? Because at some point, don't we have to have real conversations? Like what does the anticipated future look like? Can we sustain what the last 30, 40 years of land use has looked like? And how is that different for, you know, I just found out I'm gonna be a grandfather. So it's like, so like, what is my grandkid gonna look like? What does that need to look like? That's kind of a loaded question.
No, it's very loaded. And what I would first say, Wes, is I hope our state has a conversation in the next 15 years, ASAP, ideally. Because if the trend, and we've seen this in counties in which, because the really dirty secret is a whole bunch of water in our state. Ag uses 85% of their water for food production. There's a lot of water out there. So it's a question of, do we, in 200 years, not want to have that sector? And I have my passions. I think food's important. I think beef is kind of an okay thing. But nonetheless, that water's out there. And if you do really simple math, you extract water from food production, you ready? You can have 32 million people in Colorado. Simple math. There's enough water for 32 million people in Colorado. Nobody in this room wants that. So Wes, we had that conversation, and I think, you know, different communities will deal with it differently. I think, you know, for lots of different reasons, we'll densify, better or worse. We've got to get off the brass drug. How we landscape around our home can be done more thoughtfully to make water go farther. I mean, I've got a lawn, I mow it every couple of weeks, so I've got my own problems. But we should have that conversation and think about what we want our towns to look like and what we want to be around them. And it's hard to buy our way out of this. It's an agreed upon philosophy, but a lot of folks have diverse opinions about what I just said.
Thanks for staying up late at night worried about all that.
I just wanted to add to Julie's question. This is something that the Water Center is tracking and hoping to kind of bring people together to find out what the needs are, what the gaps are, what programs are needed to, is it like just a week of a class in high school to get students aware of some career opportunities? Is it that plus, an apprenticeship program or a community college or a four-year, what are the different pathways that students can take, and how do we connect them with the employers that need these positions and, can just have those
Well,
easy
I feel
pathways.
like so many of the schools anymore have, STEM has become such a big thing, but we gotta go deeper into that and make that as water. It needs to be its own little thing, and how do you get that? But there's also, I look around and I am not anywhere any kind of brain power. I've had most of you in here, but was there a possibility of me being able to, as a student, is there some part that I could play that wouldn't take me to go into a master's, or is there something like that? There's got to be all levels, I feel like, but if we could get some of those people, and I think it does start at the high school and community colleges, I do, because I think if you can get some of these people to realize that you don't necessarily have to be the Einstein of it, but there is a place for you in this, that maybe that's how we get some of these people, the next generation, into filling some of these spots, because I do have a deep worry that we will lose a lot of this and people are not following behind it.
COVID didn't help. COVID, we're going to see some implications of COVID, however we look at it. Some very unfortunate, of course, implications. But I was one that, for me, it wasn't a hard decision, but we lost some staff because of a decision I made, and that was I need to be here. And back to, there is a generation that, I shouldn't say a generation, I think there was all ages that really started. Now we have field people coming every day. You got to get stuff in the field, but we had office staff that, for reasons I can appreciate, enjoyed being home. And there came a day, and I made an argument that we do our best work when people are here. And it didn't feel good to some people, and they found their way onto other jobs, and I respect where they are. And I think, Jeff, I just love having people here, and us being on the same page every day. That younger generation, perhaps in particular, kind of looking for the next thing before they evaluate where they are. I was talking to Jason Graham, utility director for Collins, last week, and I was in his office, and he was really kind of frustrated about loss of some staff at the city. Some folks who I would probably put in the technician category, good paying jobs these days, lost to oil and gas truck driving. And I can't keep up with the pay, and we've done our best. I think we're keeping up, but I was looking for that one more dollar an hour, and it's hard to convince them to, boy, if you stay here for 30 years, you'll enjoy most every day. You got a pretty good retirement package. It's kind of hard to convey that message to a point where they'll.
30-year-old talking about retirement.
Yeah, it's not too sexy, is it? Yeah. Well,
Any other questions? And then we'll do a quick break here. And yeah, feel free to talk with Brad during the break.
Call anytime. Happy to visit more with things that you heard and you might want to reinforce. You might want to say, that's not the way of the world. And as you were talking about when I first came in the room, listening is pretty darn important. So I'd like to think I would listen to some perspectives you have that didn't align with what I mentioned. But you'll hear from some great colleagues this afternoon, and go out to the chimney hall.
We're back in here at 11. So snacks and break.
Did you say that when you look at the barrel? Good to see you again, Brian. Thank you so much for the presentation. That was fantastic. Every day. He's going to be there.
I just.
Oh my
So that's the, you know, I was curious about my developer. Right, when so anyway, she's out like,
That's right. Developer. I think about it, even just affordable housing. I think the area cities, there's a lot of questions. Affordable housing. The amount that it would. So I know it's they build affordable units. If you don't, okay, I didn't build affordable housing, but here's the money. I think about that in the water conversation of, you know, they have to come with water, they have to come with some type of water. Stories for what? The city's not gonna, you know, that's some areas of Congress, right? On shields, like I would, you know, they built it pretty quickly. But I mean, it has a swimming pool. It has 2 swimming pools. It's like, and I was actually in the zoning commission where I heard that conversation happen. It was on Zoom back in like 2020. I was just sitting there like, you're gonna approve this development, and it has like all of these things. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like you're telling them to buy more water for themselves, that you need more water for the city. I'm like, this is so
I don't like to slide down.
Water stock market. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's inflating to for years. It just has been. It's not sustainable. So this is a company. The stock market, it was bankrupt. You move to the next company with your stocks with your money. Water.
That was an excellent presentation.
Oh, yes. Yeah, a water stock market. That's interesting. Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. They'll say, no, it's the development. The developer's like, no, it's. Yeah. There's no agreement there. Yeah. The buying of all the water, that was a really, that was really I didn't think about
I know now, but
Those, but I would say.
It derailed for a moment, and then it got pulled back. Yeah. Yeah, like through the course of the program, yeah, I feel like Brad's only said things that we learned from Water Law just like last month. Like the key words and like all the things that we've spoken about in this little bit. And then we'll go into yeah. And then later on vacation plans will probably become a conversation once again. When we get to ag and all of that. Yeah, really, it's so interesting. It's gonna be interesting. Yeah, that'll be next with Kelly. Kelly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, really. Terry Ranch is interesting. I'm really curious about the permitting differences. Because like how do you permit like underground, like an aquifer that's
presently managing the NIST project. His experience also includes being a project engineer and project manager on the Southern Water Supply Project, which delivers raw water from Carter Lake Reservoir south to Broomfield and east to Fort Morgan. Mr. Bernard graduated with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in civil engineering from Colorado State University. He is married to his wonderful wife, Jenna, and has 3 children. All right, let's give it up for Carl.
Hey, thank you. So what do you call kids? I guess they're still my children, but
They're old.
well, I'm gonna have a 30-year-old here next month. Yeah, are they still children or kids? Okay, they're still children. Okay, I can still call, it makes them sound like little.
They're males.
Male, female, male. Yeah. Oh, true. Yeah, I'm gonna grow up though. I think in 10 more years, I'm planning on growing up. So, welcome. And, yeah, thank you. I've been doing this now for a few years, with this group, and, it's always kind of fun to do this. Sometimes I see faces I know, and hopefully get to know a few more of you. So yeah, I'm going to talk about NISP. I've been working on NISP for, honestly, in one way, shape, or form, most of my career. I've been with Northern since 1990, worked on the water rights, actually even back in the mid 80s as an intern for a little bit, but in the early 90s, and then helped formulate the project back in the mid 90s, and have been the project manager ever since. I had to go back and look at, when did we formally call it NISP, which but it stuck. And it was, I think 98 when it formally, I found a meeting agenda that had that for the first time. So it's been a while. I tell folks I had long, beautiful hair back in the day. And I'm not sure if the project took it away or that my children did. But, so what is NISP? NISP is a project that will provide 40,000 acre feet of new additional water supply to this region. That's a lot of water. That is enough to, depending on how, I'm seeing upwards of like 4 homes per acre foot anymore. So, if that goes through, that's, it's probably enough for a few 100,000 people in a way. And this gets to why on earth would Northern even do this? And other than Northern has a history of doing collaborative projects. Also, we felt strongly that without this, this was kind of in a bit of reaction to the Thornton coming up and doing large dry up in the Cougar Basin, that there's got to be a different way. And it's not that this project can prevent all dry up, but the equivalent dry up associated with 40,000 acre feet is about 60,000 acres. So it's the better part of a good chunk of what's left in the Cougar Basin. So it's a participant-driven project. There's 15 participants in it. See, there's a couple of you in here. And what that means is the participants will derive all the benefits, but they're also paying all the cost, all the time that I spend, our consultants spend, if we buy land and such, that's all paid for by those participants. So it's for them, and then they fund it as part of what's called a water activity enterprise, which is kind of like a wholly owned business by Northern Water, the parent of this enterprise. I'll just talk to you. Okay, next. Okay, great. So NISP at a glance. So yeah, the 40,000 acre feet per year, 2 new reservoirs. The big one, Glade Reservoir, talk a little bit about that in a minute. 80 miles of pipeline, of which 50 miles is to deliver the water to the NISP participants. And another 30 miles is part of the Gailton side of the project. It's paid for by the participants, approximately $2 billion. It got very expensive, like all water projects in Colorado have gotten expensive. This one is no exception. And we've spent almost $110 million to date on this project. So we're kind of all in on this thing. So looking at this project, you see two kind of main components. The Glade Reservoir project, so that's where we divert off the Poudre River through the existing Poudre Valley Canal right at the canyon mouth. And then there's the Gailton side of things. And Gailton you don't hear much about, but it's kind of the little engine that provides almost half the yield, half that 40,000 acre feet. It takes water from the Platte River, a lot of it during the wintertime and some spring, puts it up into Gailton, and then we release it to a couple of large irrigation companies and do an exchange with them, which is taking some of their senior water rights and putting them up into Glade. Next. Here you go. Glade, a lot like Horsetooth, a little bit bigger actually, but just one dam. Horsetooth has 4 dams. This will have just one dam, but it's a big dam. It's actually pretty similar in size to what you're going to go see this afternoon in Chimney Hollow. It's a little bit shorter, but a little bit longer than Chimney Hollow, but it still stands 280 feet tall. It's a combination of earth fill, rock fill. We're using earth instead of what you see out there at Chimney because we actually have earth. Chimney didn't have much earth to build the dam with, so they went with all rock and an asphalt core. Here we have enough material on site to do that. We have to lift it up. We put it in a 4-bay, just a holding pond from the Poudre Valley Canal. And then we have to lift it up. If any of you have ever been on our tours to the West Slope, you've seen the Windy Gap pump station and the FAR pump station over there. Hey, Greg. And those are similar. They're big pump stations, 40,000 horsepower. It's a big facility. From that, though, we can deliver all the water by gravity to all the NIST participants, so we don't have to pump along the way. We now have enough elevation to put it in there. And then, of course, we need to modify the Poudre Valley Canal. And then we have this odd thing, the Monroe Canal, which is part of the Colorado Big Thompson project, that delivers water to the North Poudre Irrigation Company. We own that, but it will be underwater. So we are going to put it in a pipe under the reservoir. And so that's going to be interesting. It's going to be a very thick pipe encased in a lot of concrete to make sure that it's never going to have a bad day. By the way, if it ever did, if it sprung a leak, we do have 2 gates on either side so we can shut it off. But it's being designed very, very conservatively. I think the price tag for that part alone is up to nearly $100 million to do that.
So what's the canal for again, the Poudre Valley Canal?
Poudre Valley is to get the water from the Poudre River into the 4-bay and then pumped up. So it's an open canal, but it has to be enlarged. Right now, it has the capacity of a few hundred CFS, and we're going to enlarge that to kind of more of a normal Colorado Big Thompson style canal, which would be about 1,300 CFS.
So the diversion from the river is going to the 4-bay first?
Yes, all goes in the 4-bay and then it gets pumped.
Into the reservoir?
Yes. Yep.
I just mentally maybe I was going the other way.
It's similar actually to our Windy Gap project. Windy Gap has a 4-bay ahead of the pump station, and then we pump up into Lake Granby. And there's a lot of fluctuations on the river, and it's a way of kind of evening out some of those fluctuations. And also, if you have a power emergency or something, it gives the water a place to go for temporarily until you get things shut down.
Can you go back and where does it come out?
So it doesn't go back another slide. So it comes actually out of the reservoir, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the conveyance here in a bit, but it comes out of the reservoir, goes in a pipeline out to the Larimer and Weld county line, and then just follows that county line down to one of our existing Southern Water Supply Project pipelines.
Then it'd be by the pump station. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And this is just a cool picture I like. It's a rendering of what it's going to look like. So you see the pump station there, the dam. Right now we're advancing to 90% design. 60% is done. So we hope to have 90% done by summer of 2024. It then goes off to the state engineer's office for their approval of the dam for safety. Okay. And then we have this highway. Highway 287 goes right through the middle of it, and we got to do something with it. So at times we get to learn a lot about transportation. We're not transportation experts, but we drive. So we're all experts, right? But that'll be kind of a neat thing. There will be a rock cut like this, and I don't know if we'll do, up in Wyoming, you see they label all the formations. I think that'd be kind of cool here too, but we'll see. But we are there as well at 90% design. We actually hired a contractor to work with us on the pre-construction to figure this thing out and how to build it in a more timely manner. And it's in a process that we'll negotiate a price. If we're successful with that negotiation, then they will be the contractor for that. Go ahead. So yeah, this is the delivery conveyance refinement and I'll talk a little bit more about this on the environmental side, but two ways of getting water out of the reservoir. One is to bring it and just keep it in a pipeline and bring it out to the county line. The other is to put it into the Poudre River, right up at the canyon mouth, bring it down the Poudre to near Fort Fun, over on Mulberry, and pick it up there and put it back into the pipeline system. That, we had to go through a lot to get that to happen. We actually had to have a state law passed to make that so that we can shepherd that water from Glade all the way down the river. And the plan is to do that 24/7, all the time, unless there's a water quality issue. We won't divert if the water quality, there was a tanker spill or something. But otherwise, we're putting water always in the river. Generally, it's about 25 CFS during the summertime and 18 during the winter, with some shoulder months of about 20. And to put that in perspective, I looked at the the Lincoln gauge in Fort Collins today, right over on Lincoln and the Poudre. It's at 5 CFS today. So if we were doing it, we would be boosting that flow to 23 CFS. So what that means is someone, and it's a diversion upstream, is diverting the entire river right now. And that's fairly common in the Poudre Basin. And what we will do is pass that water by each one of the diversion structures and make it to that point. So a real enhancement to the environment, particularly for fishery. I tell folks, fish don't need a lot of water, but they need some water. They don't do well in dry. So there's actually, we're anticipating just an excellent fishery then through LaPorte and Fort Collins. Go ahead. And then Gailton, just a quick slide on that. It's if you go out on Highway 14, out past Alt, and there's a big diagonal as they're heading out towards Sterling. We are just on the north side of that diagonal. And we've now acquired all the property up there. That thing would be about 80 feet tall and 2 miles long, much more similar to some of the plains reservoirs you see around here. So shallower, but we have bought all the land, and if we ever expand it, we want to make sure that, there's a lot of oil and gas development going up in that area, and we didn't want that to mess with the reservoir site or if we ever did an expansion. So we did buy enough to, just in case we ever expand. So now we own 4,000 acres up in that area, and we rent that all back to the ranchers actually that we bought it from, and they're ranching it until we use it. Go ahead. The ditch substitution, I mentioned a little bit about that. It's about roughly a quarter of the water that they're presently diverting is what we're going to exchange into those companies. They'll get a like amount, actually they'll get a bonus amount on top of what we give them, about roughly 25% more. The issue that we've been dealing with primarily is salinity. The water in the Platte is more saline than the water. Do you want to come in? Oh, okay. Need to be hospitable. The water in the Platte is more saline than what's coming off the mountains. We're just so blessed on what comes off of our mountains there. However, to put in perspective, the salinity is very similar to what's in Lake Mead in the Platte. So it's not seawater. It's very good for growing crops, but it's different. So Greg Dewey, who just stepped in, is really heading up that program of working with the farmers, getting them on board to this. And basically, one of the companies, we have a lot of enthusiasm. One of them we have to work on a little bit more, but we're coming there, or we're getting there, and I know we're going to be successful. And I'll talk a little bit more about the water secure part of this here in a minute. Okay. So the permitting, it has been a long haul. We filed for our initial permit back in 2004 with the Army Corps of Engineers. So that was for a Section 404 permit for the reservoir itself, had some wetlands in it. There's a little creek that goes through there that you can hop across, but basically, if you impact anything more than, I think, 1/3 of an acre of waters of the U.S., you're into NEPA. And then it's the degree, generally, depending on the amount of impacts as well as the profile of the project. If it's a high profile controversy, you're probably going to do an environmental impact statement, and that's what we have to do. We did a draft EIS in 2008, and that was met with a lot of scrutiny. We had a lot of comments on it. So it was kind of, in talking with the Corps of Engineers, back to the drawing board. What do we do? And basically it was doing the analyses to a much greater degree of refinement. So the putty ball got, instead of kind of being a lump, it got very, very refined. And that took time. That took up until 2015 to get that supplemental EIS out. But even at that point, we knew we needed to do something more with the project to really enhance its both the mitigation, but also actually enhancement. What can we do to make the environment better? And that's when we came up with the conveyance refinement that I mentioned. And that turned it around, quite frankly. I got an email from EPA going, wow, this is a game changer. And EPA in the earlier years wasn't exactly a fan of the project. So, so it has been a long slog. We got the final EIS out in 2018, and finally the Section 404 permit came in December of last year, and we got the record of decision in January. So that was a long haul. A lot of agencies cooperated on that, and I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what's in that permit. But on top of that, we had other program or processes that we had to go through. You have to go through with a new reservoir. You have to go through the state Fish and Wildlife and Enhancement process called Section 102. So we did that and got that plan approved for basically the mitigation for everything more or less other than wetlands and water quality. Got that approved in 2017. The governor then wrote a letter in support of the project, so we're good to go there. And then we also went through in 2020 for the pipelines particularly, but also for the reservoir, the local permitting, which was the Larimer County 1041 permitting process, and got through that as well. So yeah, here's the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Plan. Permitting, yep, we have our state, we have our local, and we have our federal. And it's taken a lot of effort to get there, but we're there.
Ask a question about the decision regarding WOTUS and how waters of the United States, and if that had any impact or consideration with this whole process?
This process has been so long that waters of the US, what's a creek basically, and what is a affected wetland, has changed 4 or 5 times. There was Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, court reverse of Biden. So I think we're to 5. We basically followed the Obama rule, not knowing it was probably one of the more conservative. So we followed that. And that is what our project impacts were based on, and our mitigation. In theory, we could go back, and I'm not going back again. I'm not going to spend, be spending a couple $1 million to lose many more years. But in theory, Glade would no longer be jurisdictional, which would mean we would not have to mitigate those wetlands, because the new court ruling, Glade would not be considered a waters of the US, but we're not going to go back. So our project, we're kind of good to go. The state of Colorado is looking at filling that in to take the things that are no longer covered due to the court ruling, the Supreme Court ruling, and cover those things. So ultimately, in Colorado, we would have had to have covered them one way or the other. So we're good, and we're not going to go back and kind of tinker around with that. So yeah, the permit, 19 years of permitting, and is someone from Fort Collins talking today? No, on Halligan. Okay, I mean Halligan started a year after, and they just got their final EIS. There's something I consider Halligan to be pretty benign. I mean, it's a little bit remote, and yet it's just taking water projects an awful long time. And was not always the case. Even when we started, the Corps thought maybe 3 or 4 years, and that turned into 19. So it takes longer than it takes to develop a nuclear power plant. And there's just something about water, and water in the West, I kind of get it though. There's just a lot in play there. Numerous alternatives looked at, a lot of cooperating agencies, EPA, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, State of Colorado, DNR, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDOT and Larimer County were all part of it. So they're helping guide that process, but they can also take time. If they have to review it, a lot of the last 4 years, we're just getting folks to review the final stuff. So we did our Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and a programmatic agreement for cultural resources. So basically, we're good to go. We're good. We have a permit. If we wanted to start construction today, we could do so. Go ahead. So next steps. A lot of it is becoming about the money. It's gotten to be, as I said, a very expensive project. One thing that has recently happened that's awesome is we were invited to apply by EPA for what's called WIFIA financing, which is a low interest loan through the federal government. They'll pay for 49% of the project. So that was a big deal. It comes with a lot of flexibility as well. The rest of it is going to be spread out, and we will use either conventional financing, revenue bonds and that kind of thing. It could be, actually, we are going down to the state of Colorado on Thursday through the Colorado Water Conservation Board to ask for $100 million of low interest loan money. And we may be going back to them again. And then also, like Colorado Water Resource and Power Development Authority could be a funder as well. So that's becoming kind of the big thing on the project is now the money, how we're going to pay for it. And particularly how are the participants going to pay for it. So go ahead. We'll get design finalized by next year. We will then go on into the contracting for a contractor and start construction in mid-2025. Go ahead, Jeff. The water secure part, Greg's working on this, is a recognition that those folks out in those irrigation companies could sell their water off their land. It's called buy and dry. And there are folks in the Denver metro area that would be happy to come up here, who are coming up here, quite frankly, and buying water supplies. So we have to secure those water supplies, and it's going to involve financial instruments, working with them, effectively putting a conservation easement on enough property out in the area around Eaton and Alt and Lucerne in that area to make sure that we have something to exchange on. So that's a whole program in and of itself that we're working with Colorado Open Lands as a potential partner. There are some tax incentive programs that we're likely going to be taking advantage of to help secure basically those waters on those farms so we have something to trade on. Go ahead. And finally, the project schedule. Our record of decision, start construction in 2025. Basically try to get water flowing into the project around 2030 and then finishing up the Gailton side of things as well. I will say that this schedule is in flux, looking at are there ways of maybe spreading the Gailton side of things out a few more years, and probably likely. And then I'll talk about, might as well talk about it now, of what if we get litigation, and that could very well happen. They've said they would sue, and it hasn't happened yet, but I anticipate it'll likely happen. And then we're going to have to figure out what do we do during litigation. And that can range from the Chimney Hollow approach, which was pretty conservative and not going forward with any construction until litigation was finalized, to how Denver on their Gross Reservoir project and the Chatfield project, they just said, we're going forward. Unless they give an injunction, that's a whole different, that amps the whole court proceedings up. We have a valid permit, so we can start construction. And so at the time of litigation, we're gonna have to figure out a strategy of what parts. Do we do the whole thing? Do we do part of it? Do we do none of it? And that's something that we need to work through with both our attorneys as well as our participants. So I think that's it.
Right.
Close.
Well, you mentioned litigation, because that's the same,
Yeah.
the ones who are local. There are valid missions to support this whole project.
Yes.
Chance of it. I suspect that if you're gonna keep doing it, they keep saying, no, you're not. It's gonna be something.
Well, that's why I said, I think that same group, under a different name, but they filed on our Chimney Hollow project, the Windy Gap Firming project as well. Same folks, likely the same. EAS is not good enough and such. And the federal court upheld so it's more, I think we feel very confident in the work that we did. The bugger is that it generally takes a good 3, as much as 5 years to go through court. And I wish the court process would be a little bit more speedy, but you can't, it will get tried in federal district court. Actually, they would sue the Army Corps of Engineers, and then the Department of Justice would defend the project. We would enjoin ourselves, but ultimately it's the federal government that would be defending the permit. Yeah, but I expect something here. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, is there recreation anticipated on the lake?
Oh yeah, that's one of the slides I chopped. I had to chop a few. Yeah, we're going to have a neat recreation area. So there will be about 190 acres of area below the dam and on the foothills that we own all of right now. We bought the old KOA up there, so it's going to be revamping that. But we bought that. A lot of it came with water taps and sewer and such, so that was handy. And then there'll be access to the reservoir and so boating, because of the nature of Glade of kind of having in the main reservoir and then a little bit bigger thumb. Thought is that we would put the thumb area as wakeless and, like for paddle boarders and whatnot, and then the other can be the Mad Max weekend. I'm sure.
What about Gailton?
Gailton right now does not have recreation. That doesn't mean that we can't. Recreation does have some interesting implications though, particularly in water quality. It changes your use class. And so suddenly you may have to do things in the reservoir, which is going to be Platte River water. So the thought is that let's just keep the reservoir, the recreation off for right now, and then maybe someday it could be added to it. Yes, sir.
Over the 19 years now, the permitting stretched a long time. Has the project changed at all? Is there any significant differences in the project over the time?
The big difference in the project has been largely the conveyance. The original conveyance was going to be an exchange through the Colorado Big Thompson project. So what we were going to do is deliver water, horsetooth water in a way, down to the Poudre River out of Glade, keep that water in horsetooth, and then kind of bank it back into the whole Colorado Big Thompson project and make it available. That we figured out due to some imbalances within the CBT system, just in the nature of where the units have shifted generally from north to south. Adding more to that was going to be problematic. So then we added pipes. And when we added pipes, then the opportunity to put some water down the river presented itself. And that really changed again the nature and complexion of the project. And the environmental impacts. Suddenly we had in the listing of the impacts, we had positives and like, hooray. So yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So you own all the property around Gailton, but not Glade.
So Glade, we own most of Glade, and there's a little bit of private property that we need to acquire yet. Maybe 100 acres or so. It's not much. And then there's state school land in it that we've been talking to them. So that we figured out the process for that. So kind of right in the middle is state land. And then as part of our environmental mitigation, so the state schools want to maximize the revenue for the children, and that's wonderful. Except that, and at times they've said, well, that means we could put condos all along, and we like, no, 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 no. So we're gonna protect the western side of the reservoir for elk habitat. And we're gonna acquire an additional, roughly about 1,000 acres in that area for protection as well from the state. So that's the big part that we have to get. But Northern, we were fortunate, Northern acquired most of the property back in the mid-80s. So otherwise it would have been Bonner Peak South. I'm certain of that, yeah, and we wouldn't be even having this discussion then.
Okay. Where on the northern bound, how far, does it go to Bonner Peak?
It does, it's about a mile shy of Bonner Peak, yeah. If you know where that Pioneer quarry is, that's pretty much the northern extent of it.
Yeah, I'm curious how you're going to divert 287.
There's a cut, or there's a hog back, a low spot, but we have to bring that low spot a lot lower, and it will come through there.
So once you begin construction, everyone's going to be on Owl Canyon trying to get up to Laramie.
So either we do 287 first before we do Glade, or we do them concurrently, but then there's a lot of Glade to the west of the highway. So the highway would be live. So we are not going to, maybe there's gonna be a day shut down when we switch from one to the other, but basically, and it should be a safer road. That's a dangerous road. And so all the new safety criteria that would be on a new road are part of this. And particularly on the south side, and this is via Larimer County. Larimer County recognized the safety issue. So there's right just north of LaPorte, where I think it's 23 goes up and crosses there. That's dangerous. I don't know. You got to, okay, go. We're going to put a roundabout there. And that roundabout's, it's hard to have a head-on collision in a roundabout. You got to really be working at it. You may get a side swipe, but it just much safer. Okay. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
And actually, if Helen's okay with it, we might get lunch and come back so we have enough time for discussion afterwards before our field trip. Is that good? Okay, so
presentations for Terry Ranch before, but I'll probably be talking about it from a different perspective, from more of a planning and long-term planning perspective. Oh, can I do it now?
Second.
Okay, so first I just wanted to start out, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the city of Greeley, our general location, and then our source water system. So we have an incredibly diverse source water system. We get our water from 4 different river basins, including from the CBT project and Windy Gap projects. We get Colorado River Basin water, Laramie River Basin water, Poudre Basin water, and Big Thompson water. That water is treated at 2 different treatment plants, one in Loveland and then one right at the mouth of the canyon in Bellevue. And it's transported to our citizens via tunnel or via pipes to the city of Greeley. Today, what I'll be talking about is our long-term, our like epitome of how we're going to solidify our long-term supplies with the Terry Ranch project. As we heard about earlier today, we had been trying for a long time to expand Seaman Reservoir, which is right there, that top star, Milton Seaman Reservoir. It's on the North Fork of the Cashel Poudre River. Yeah, there you go. And we were trying for a really long time to expand that reservoir. And given the permitting issues, we were running into 1, timeline, 2, monetary, and 3, just permitting hurdles. And part of those permitting hurdles meant that we had to do what we called a revised alternative screening. So we had to go through all these different alternatives to say that this was really the only way that we could move forward was with expanding Milton Seaman. During that alternative screening, we identified Terry Ranch as an alternative, and we went through a diligence process to see, one, how plausible was it to integrate to our system, and then how safe was it? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, what I'll talk about is what is Terry Ranch. It is a bison ranch that is just south of the Wyoming border and just east of I-25. You can go and like have dinner there if you want. Yeah, you can go. But where we'll be drilling wells is primarily literally just open, barren landscape that does have an active bison ranch on it. Underneath Terry Ranch is a non-tributary aquifer. And so if you're familiar with aquifer descriptions, a non-tributary aquifer basically means that because of the geology around the water system, it's basically closed to inflows and outflows. So theirs are happening so slowly that it's basically considered a closed system. And we're considering it like a bucket that we can use as almost a reservoir. And that's why we first started looking at it. However, it is decreed with 1.2 million acre feet of water, and that's a lot of water. And so we needed to figure out exactly how we were going to use that. The idea of Terry Ranch initially coming from the Milton Seaman expansion was to use it just as we would a reservoir. So start it empty and then put water in to pull it out. There is a little bit of space that we can utilize to put water in there. But what we ended up deciding was we wanted to go for a full, what's called ASR, Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project, which basically means that when water is available, so when we have these wet years like we did this year, we'll be able to put our native rights on the Poudre or any change, wholly consumptive rights into Terry Ranch, pump those up, pump them into Terry Ranch, and then during periods of drought or high risk environments. So like I said earlier, we have these 4 different river basins that seem really robust, but in 2020, they all burned. And we're still seeing the effects of that today, where we can't pull water off of the main stem based off of high turbidity after rainfalls, those types of things. So if there's any reason that we ever don't have enough water, is that you or me? Okay, sorry. If we don't have enough water from drought conditions or other high risk conditions, we'll be able to pull from Terry Ranch. So as I said, when we first identified Terry Ranch as a project, we really needed to do our due diligence to make sure that it was, 1, plausible to integrate into our system, but 2, safe for our community as a whole. So we conducted an incredibly rigorous inspection period where we brought on outside engineering firms and scientists to confirm the safety, reliability, and affordability of the Terry Ranch project. That included a really intense water quality study where we took over 7,000 data points. We concluded that the water quality overall was excellent, but that there was uranium present, and we needed to be able to remove that uranium. There was a lot of concern in our community about the fact that uranium was present, but we ended up doing a on-the-ground 30-day pilot test to confirm that standard practices could remove the uranium below detection levels. So it will be our most expensive water to treat just based off of its location and the physical need to pump and extract water out and treat it before it's put into a pipe to come to the city, but it will be maybe the easiest water to treat.
I just ask about that 1.2 million acre feet of water. So was that purchased with a project? Okay.
Yes.
So you can just tap that aquifer.
We can tap it and use it right now if we wanted.
To extinction.
To extinction, but we're constrained by using only 1% a year from the time of purchase. So we are banking that right now. You can bank it.
Okay.
So we can only use 1,200 acre feet of water annually from their native water. That's not pumped water. So once we start pumping water in, the accounting will become much more difficult because we'll have a lot of different colors of water going in there.
And the aquifers, like the geographic area of it is all within that land area?
So no.
Okay.
And no. Right now, there are two different landowners that have the primary extent of the ranch. There's the private Terry Ranch owners, which is who we did not purchase the water from them. We were lucky enough to work with Wingfoot, who had done most of the part. They went and they got the decree for us. So they got this non-tributary decree. It was not risky at all, really, for the city because we weren't having to bet on the ability to get the decree. But it is checkerboarded with state land board, which someone could theoretically come and utilize that access. So you would have to then go into a change case, go through the water court system and figure out how much water would be decreed under those parcels of land. And then there was just a case that went out, Lazy B, that is just to the east of us. So there's a huge aquifer system. This is just for physically accessible from our parcels of land.
1.2 million.
Yeah, but I am not a groundwater expert.
You mentioned the separation of the uranium out of this part. I assume you're gonna get particulate uranium.
Mm-hmm.
How do you dispose of that? That has other issues.
That is an issue upon itself, and you essentially have to pay. So that's another reason that
Because some mine somewhere dump it in.
Yeah. So there are companies that you can pay to remove the uranium.
Can you sell it?
I think you can sell it. We haven't looked into that necessarily, but there is a market for it, I believe. Yeah.
Sorry, if you go back, I think it was 2 slides. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correct. You're injecting treated water into the aquifer, then you're pulling it out of the aquifer and then treating it again.
Yeah, so it has to be treated twice. So that's another cost burden to us for sure. So what we're doing is essentially tapping into our 60-inch pipeline and I can walk all the way back. So we have a pipeline that takes water from the Bellevue treatment plant all the way to Greeley. And then we'll have what's called a bi-directional pipeline that will tap into that 60-inch. So everything has to be treated when it's coming into this. So we have to treat it at Bellevue. And this is we can talk about it, but it's a really hard crux when modeling how we're going to use it later, because you can imagine periods where there's a lot of water, there's generally a lot of demand. And so we'll be having there will be an art to how we're going to operate the system once it's operating at full capacity, of how we're going to be treating water at different locations. We might be using Boyd more than we had traditionally used, or using Bellevue, or we've looked at different ways to model like a pre-positioning of water. So capturing our water rights when it's high runoff, and then trying to look at treating them and sending them when there's more capacity in the pipeline.
So is that treatment before injection an ecological concern or a legal concern?
So the treatment before injection is because we're using treated pipelines.
It's just because.
You're using treated pipelines. I do believe it makes like everything else easier in terms of once we're getting permitting completed for the Terry Ranch project, because you're not putting in water that you know is contaminated. But then when we're taking it out, again, it's going into a treated pipeline. So we will have to build a treatment facility on the Terry Ranch area. I'm going to start talking about planning. Do we want to talk about this at all anymore? We can go back. Once we decided upon Terry Ranch and we went through with the purchase of Terry Ranch, we needed to plan for how we were going to use it. And so we had to update our water resources master plan. And what we did is we went forward in a little bit of a different way than our community has been used to. So we have been planning for one future that we're just guessing is likely to happen. And that's what we were planning for in terms of acquisitions and how we were sizing pipes, all of those things. Instead, we went for an integrated water resource plan approach, which essentially accounts for the fact that as we move into the future, it becomes more and more uncertain, and we just can't track all of those variables. So we did that. We planned in that way by using scenarios. And we came upon these scenarios by essentially asking everybody in the department, like, what are you worried about? What are the risks that you're seeing in the future that we might have to deal with? We also used a consultant team to facilitate this and to help us decide upon these. And then we binned all of those risks into what we called drivers. So we ended up with 4 main driver categories, and we varied those drivers into 5 different buckets for different planning scenarios. So we had this no climate change scenario, which we wanted to show, what's the effect of climate change. We had an optimistic scenario, continued trend, stressed, and then unbearable. And as you walk through these, so we had climate warming. We essentially, as the suns get more, that means more climate warming. And then Colorado River Basin impacts is a little opposite. What it means is the more buckets mean more physical water. So we modeled essentially chronic and acute outages of our Colorado River sources, basically saying, hey, we're seeing all of this tumultuousness, via lower basin, Colorado River stuff. Like, what's going to happen? Maybe there's an outage in the CBT system. That's 1 year. Maybe there's a chronic outage where we're seeing just less yield in general over time. So the fewer buckets mean less yield. Same with water rights administration. We realize that there's a big risk of not only how our water rights are being administered on the river, so how that counting is happening, but how rights are being changed. So we Greeley has been around for a long time, changing rights from agricultural use to municipal for a long time. We've been assuming that we would get the same favorable outcomes in cases, and we're not really seeing that anymore. So things like return flow obligations might be higher, turn back clauses, those types of things, we might see more unfavorable results for Greeley, resulting in literally lower water rights than we have been modeling. And then from a demand growth period perspective, we wanted to be able to capture the huge variability that many organizations and communities have seen already. We really wanted to capture a low demand. So the city of Greeley, like many communities, is seeing population grow and is not seeing demand growth. So between the ability to have really high efficiency fixtures and people just kind of a lawn abandonment or transforming landscapes into more xeric friendly landscapes, we're just not seeing the demand match population. So we wanted to make sure we're covering that low demand scenario. And then we also wanted to say, hey, what about if all these other communities stop being able to handle growth and really start seeing a lot just because we have the ability and the capacity, both from a land and a water resources standpoint, to grow. So we varied all of these and we modeled them. And we asked ourselves on 3 different time horizons, like, what's up with Terry Ranch? What are we going to do? The first was a 10-year horizon. We said, hey, how are we going to like make sure that we're doing our due diligence to move forward with this project without overburdening the population that really doesn't need this project quite yet. We then wanted to understand what would it look like to trigger Terry Ranch and what conditions would be present to need to trigger Terry Ranch, because it's really it's not a date, it's a condition that we're seeing, right? It's a demand, it's a yield question. And then we wanted to look way far out and say, once Terry Ranch is fully integrated, both injection and extraction, what does it look like and how do we make sure that's sustainable? Because like I said, when we first imagined the Terry Ranch project, we imagined it as this empty bucket that we would only be putting water in to take out. Well, it comes full. So is that reasonable to do? And how far do we want to take the water level down? Not from a groundwater modeling standpoint, but just from like a ethics, community value standpoint. So we came up with this like really simple timeline, what it would look like to implement Terry Ranch. Essentially, from a close standpoint, we wanted to implement high priority pipeline. So we want to get pipeline out of areas that we know are going to grow and we know are going to be really difficult to put pipe in years from now. We'll then continue to lay the remaining pipe and make sure we have easements to do that. And then we'll start construction on the treatment facility. Once the treatment facility is done, we'll start installing the initial wells just for extraction. So there's infrastructure that needs to be built for injection. So what we realized is after we looked at a lot of the modeling, we have these events where we may need to extract water from Terry Ranch. We don't really need to inject it quite yet because we're using it at such a low level. And we'll talk about it later, but one of the issues is once we bring wells online, they basically have to stay online. Not fully, but we need to cycle them in order for them to maintain health. And so we're not putting too much of a burden on further infrastructure later down the line. We'll then upgrade those existing wells with injection capacity, and then we'll just grow as needed, obviously up to the capacity that the Terry Ranch physical structure of land and the aquifer can handle. So we asked ourselves, what are those triggers? So what are those conditions for needing to trigger Terry Ranch? And like I mentioned, it's really influenced by demand growth and yield impacts. And so we came up with essentially an adaptive plan, so a way that we can monitor the state of both our yields and our demand growth to be able to present to our board and say, hey, things are looking good, we're good, we don't need to speed up production or speed up pipes or whatever. But as soon as we start seeing triggers, for example, population matching demand growth, like as soon as we start seeing demand meet with population, we say, hey, we need to start. We really need to make sure that we'll be able to trigger Terry Ranch when needed. So high demand growth, significant yield impacts. So if we see just 5 years of drought over and over and over, and we're getting a little antsy about that, then we may need to trigger Terry Ranch earlier. But if we continue to see population grow without increased demand, then we might be able to hang off for Terry Ranch. So from this, we basically created this 3-pronged water supply system strategy going forward. We'll continue to build a robust portfolio. We still do need to acquire some surface water rights. So we'll continue with strategic acquisition. We need to continue to change our water rights from agricultural to municipal. We'll continue to develop storage projects. That includes investment in the Windy Gap project, investment in the Terry Ranch project. And we'll want to responsibly develop Terry Ranch. And really what that means is that we want to complete priority infrastructure, but from a critical infrastructure standpoint, we need to balance it with other needs. Like many communities, we're really seeing aging infrastructure impact us. So while we need to invest in Cherry Ranch, we want to make sure we're investing internally to the city as well. And then we'll continue to study IWRP recommended projects, which include things like storage retiming, like I was mentioning before. And then we'll continue to try to ensure sustainable and affordable water through demand management, conservation efforts, and adaptive planning. This is really just to help show how on a near-term schedule, we're trying to balance Cherry Ranch with other needs. So we're going to invest in that high priority pipeline, get it out of the growth area, and then probably cool off on it for a little bit and move to some other like raw water conveyance optimization projects, those types of things. From an adaptive planning standpoint, this is what I mentioned before. Each year we will monitor conditions and report to our board and essentially give them an update of how we feel like the conditions are moving forward. So monitoring that demand growth, water supply conditions, just as I mentioned before, and then evaluating the triggers, and then therefore updating the implementation plan, whether or not it needs to be sped up or slowed down. And then just like we're monitoring supply conditions, we'll be assessing those water rights changes and our ability to acquire water. And we'll continue to review other water supply opportunities, whether that's just us being a stakeholder in the room and protecting our own assets or wanting to be part of those other opportunities. That was a lot.
Okay, so not water engineer, nothing, so I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm gonna try and ask a question, but it's related to your supply, kind of that calibration of making sure you have enough to do what you need to do and then be looking at the future for more growth and whatever you need later. I'll give you an example of a community, like Colorado Springs has a policy where they have a contingency water supply of 30% always. So you're never gonna be in a situation where, you know, like, for instance, maybe you've got Cherry Ranch up and running, but you can't find any water to acquire. That's kind of the piece I'm wondering, is there a contingency kind of planning in that particular piece of the process?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Big answer, the way that we model this is so conservative. And it honestly freaks me out a little bit sometimes just from a investment standpoint, because at every level, so not only are we modeling 5 different scenarios, we're modeling 100 different hydrologies. And then we're modeling the most conservative estimates on every single right we have. And then we're modeling a need to have 50% of our water and storage for the next year. So we have all of these triggers that are basically just compounding on each other for that conservative model run. And so absolutely.
Contingencies built in.
Yes, it's just contingency on contingency, I would say, but we model the water rights in a surface allocation model that essentially allows us to give it rules, and we can tell it, we'll never let these come down. These being surface storage accounts. So we'll never let semen get below a certain amount, those types of things. So we can really tweak that. And we also can model the way that we're putting burden on the community in terms of demand suppression. So if we were to get into a drought scenario, we do have a drought plan that will say, hey, everybody needs to stop watering, and we can collect that data. We will become more sophisticated as we transition to AMI and understand how people are using water a little bit more. As a community, I will be really interested to see once we have a full spread of usage, if we have a pretty sophisticated water budget. So we're doing just per person per household, they get a certain amount of water, and then we have tiers above that hopefully keeps them within a certain usage. But I'm starting to see, at least downtown and some of our other neighborhoods, we do have a lot of abandonment. So we do have a lot of hardening happening, and I'm curious to see how that will move forward, and as new communities as a newer community in certain areas, we're seeing development happen very differently. There's less lawn, there's more communal space. We're transitioning to non-pop for some of those communal spaces. So I wonder if those contingencies will need to change eventually.
You'll have offsets, yeah.
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 Yes.
Price tag up there.
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I really don't know. Through the purchase and sale agreement, we were able to purchase Terry Ranch and get funds from Wingfoot that we can leverage. And that's part of the reason that we're moving really quickly on this priority infrastructure is that we essentially, once we purchased it, they are matching our funds dollar for dollar in the first few years up to a certain amount. And then we have a second round of those funds. The purchase and sale agreement, which is what my boss used to present on, is incredibly complicated. We essentially purchased Terry Ranch using credits for our cash in lieu water. So Wingfoot is able to sell developers credits that we will honor so that we didn't have to put up a bunch of cash up front. We're able to essentially sell it buying into our system, which allows for an incredible amount of security for the city. But it makes it really hard because I don't know if I could adequately tell you how much, even from a purchase price standpoint or from an eventual investment standpoint.
Who's Wingfoot?
Wingfoot is the organization that came in and bought the water rights from the original owners of the ranch. And then they went through the process of, they're just a private company. They went through the process.
Capital, it's a subsidiary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a subsidiary.
They're relatively local. I didn't know if they were.
Yeah, they're the MOA.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I asked is I know when the city was looking at expanding Seaman, I mean, that was 15, 20 years of tens of billions of dollars
Yes.
investment to ultimately end up back at square one.
Oh, 100%. It's much more affordable. And part of the affordability part comes from the feasibility part, is that we're not having to burden the user right now to do this project that's going to be needed 50 years from now, like fully burdened right now.
You're not passing a massive tax or rate.
Right, and because we're an enterprise fund, we're run by revenue, and so we can just kind of grow more organically with the Terry Ranch project. But it will kind of depend on when do we build the facility, because as we've seen, prices, nobody could have guessed that 3 years ago prices would be where they are now, but we are seeing them come down a little bit.
And did you buy the actual ranch itself or just buy the water?
We just bought the water underneath
Yeah,
it, yeah.
you just think quite the property, but I was thinking you don't care about
No.
the grass on top.
No, we do have to communicate with the ranch owners for access and are working with them right now to figure out exactly what the layout's gonna be and roads and those types of things, but no, we don't own the land. Right on time. Oh, this is like my throw-in slide. I just find it fascinating. So right now we're at like a 23,000 demand level, acre feet per year. And you can see that in our low demand scenario, like we don't get much higher than that. We have enough water to do that right now. But we could also be, way more than double that in the future based off of that really high demand scenario. But also what we decided to do is we ended up doing a little bit of we don't even see this growth yet. So this is even pushed further out because we're not even seeing growth as a community yet. So these numbers could be, 100 years from now.
Okay, getting ready for field trip.
I think they're getting the vehicles.
Okay.
We're getting them prepped and ready.
So